In this session, we shall discuss a few aspects under the topic social inequality. Okay, the topic for today's discussion is social inequality. It looks like a very general term, all encompassing term, so we do not know where to begin it from. Whether you should look at it from the perspective of class, that is where money is involved, wealth is involved, or should you look at it from the perspective of caste, where communalism is involved, or basic stratification of Indian culture is involved, or should we look at it also gender and racial and economic inequalities? Okay, so these are the different perspectives with which you can look at the factor of social inequality. How do you basically understand the term social inequality? Right? It refers to the phenomenon where individuals in a society do not have equal social status. So that we generally term as social inequality. Okay, the basic examples under which social inequality can be studied are economic inequality, which comes under a class system, which comes under class discrimination. Okay, so economic inequality obviously includes inequality based on distribution of wealth and income. So that is the economic or class inequality. Okay, the second kind of inequality you come across is gender inequality, which is quite obvious and which is very common. Okay, so which is not very direct many times, but it is covert and implicit, hidden kind of reality. Okay, here what is basically involved is power. Okay, and also reward based on gender classification. Okay, if you belong to one gender, especially the male gender, you receive reward for so many things. If you belong to uh, the female sex, if you are a woman, so feminine gender usually receives a kind of maltreatment, most of the times insults and rejections. So this is another important aspect under which gender inequality can be studied, right? So here it's a kind of covert inequality. You can't directly pinpoint and showcase it to people, but it is implicit. It can be felt. It is evident, and sometimes even vocalized. Okay, but not very loudly and openly. Okay, this is the usual scenario about gender inequality. So next kind of very common inequality which you find is racial inequality. Okay, racial inequality, as we learned in the previous videos recordings, that racial inequality basically refers to the social discrimination was practiced across the world, called racism, right? And racial inequality is something which is propounded exclusively on the basis of one's skin color. So if you are a black person, then you will be rejected, insulted, you run very low in the marriage markets, especially irrespective of the gender. If you are a darker person who has a darker skin comparatively to the general crowd of a country, you are looked at a kind of a person with a lack, as if you lack something, as if you are something strange. You don't fit into the ideal expectations, the ideal scenarios, the ideal standards indeed set by a particular society and its culture. So that's the most prevalent form of social inequality, racial difference, right? So based on one's skin color exclusively, that unequal treatment is meted out, right? So that is racial inequality, which is rooted in the uh, the most evil practice called racism, right? So next you have class consciousness, that is the most important form of social inequality, which has its root from another kind of inequality which we have already discussed, that is economic inequality. So how do we generally define class or class consciousness? We can understand the class consciousness as the awareness of belonging to one's social class, social position, or socio-economic status within a given society. So, this we understand as class consciousness, and based on this consciousness, the society is again divided into unequal terms as people belonging to upper class, then middle class, then the lower classes. Okay, then coming back to social stratification or inequality, it is based on four basic principles. That is, the first point is social stratification is a trait of society and not simply a reflection of individual differences. Okay, so it is widely practiced in the entire society. It is not targeted or directed against one particular person as such. Okay, so it's widely prevalent phenomenon. And the second point is social stratification carries over from generation to generation. At least that is exactly what happens in common scenario, that social stratification of any kind, especially the systems, rigid stratifications like caste system, they are usually passed on from one generation to the other. Okay, whereas when we say class system under social stratification, it is an open system. Okay, it is an open system, whereas somebody who once belonged to lower castes may actually rise up to the upper, sorry, but somebody who belonged to lower class or low economic position can eventually rise up to upper class. Okay, either with one's hard work, either with one's luck or providence, or either with some sudden fortune that comes one's way sometimes in life. Okay, so class system is a open system, whereas there are some rigid uh, stratifications in society, in Indian society especially, like caste system, which are closed ended, wherein this stratification and inequality moves on or carries forward from one generation to the other. Okay, and within the given society, social inequality or stratification is universal. Okay, it's not universal across the world, but within the society, which is, it is all prevalent and universal, but at the same time it is variable. With the passage of time, it could also be changing, or there could also be variations and changes, so it is variable. Okay, one more point under social stratification involves not just inequality but beliefs as well. Okay, so social stratification is not just the equation of inequality, but there are also stronger beliefs which justify and support and sometimes rationalize why these stratifications should exist in a society for the smooth functioning and betterment of society itself. Of course, it's a cover statement. For example, caste system is rationalized and justified that it is created for the betterment, welfare, and smooth functioning of the society. But if you actually analyze it logically and with reasonable basis, it doesn't have any such justifiable stance. Okay, so it is filled with injustice, but sometimes it carries over because people who belong to that society, they adapt it and they accept it, and they go ahead with their trust and beliefs in the system. Okay, so to conclude, you can have different types of social inequality or stratification, which can be divided into caste system, which is social, class system, which is economic, and racial discrimination or racial inequality or racism based on hereditary differences, okay, or physical traits like skin color. So these were some of the types or kinds of social inequalities based on different social stratification in Indian society and culture.